We just had our communion, and I just remember the story that Gio and Sarah shared with us, that way back when we were in the Philippines pastoring our church in Antipolo, that they would always be very excited during Communion Sunday. Little did I know that in their confession, the reason was because after communion, unlike here, we have our communion wafers. So back in the Philippines, what we used was monay. It was a sweet bread, diba? Because we want the ceremony of breaking the bread, physically breaking it, and then that's the one that we distribute. And lo and behold, my very sweet children were very excited because if the monay was not consumed, what do you think they would do? They would go at the back and feast on the monay, and they would invite pa some of the other children. And one day, one of our leaders approached Pastor Joey and told them, "Pastor, may nagtatanong po, pwede po bang kainin yung monay pagkatapos ng communion?" Kasi daw, their concept is that it was offered already to be able to serve as the communion elements. So meron ng semblance of holiness, yung monay. So after that, we had to tell our children, "Anak, do not eat the monay after communion." So of course, you'll have 1,001 whys. And every time you answer a why, another why would be asked. But we had to do that because there were questions being raised. And pretty much like our conversation last Sunday, when we were told that the church in Corinth had the same predicament. When they were starting to question Paul whether food offered or meat offered to idols were okay to be eaten, right? If you were here, I hope you were all here. We had that beautiful conversation, and we came to that conclusion where we said that know it all without love for all amounts to nothing at all. When Paul acknowledges the fact that knowledge is very important, but if we just rely simply on knowledge and we do not have it in the atmosphere of love, then it will mean nothing. Even 1 Corinthians chapter 13 would be able to attest to that. The love chapter would say that even if I have all the knowledge in the world, if I do not have love, it is nothing. The people of Corinth, the new believers of Corinth, wrote Paul because of some of the questions that were raised. And these questions were causing division in the church. Because if knowledge is the only thing that is run, if it is everything is just knowledge-based, then of course what happens is that there is hurt, there is division, there is conflict, because know it all lang sila. It is just all knowledge. And therefore, Paul deemed it necessary to answer the letter of the Corinthians to him, asking them, can you imagine, as I've said, lechon, hamon, kaldereta, mechado, papaitan, yun ang nagiging division ng church. They were all questioning the fact whether this food can indeed be eaten by the new believers. At the onset, the apostles have already released a decree, as a matter of fact. In the Jerusalem Council, where you read in the book of Acts, they have already released the press release where they said, you should not partake of feasts where food offered to idols are being served. But as we've said, the church in Corinth, being in Greece, a seat of intellect, they felt that they were more knowledgeable than the apostles. So they were questioning this it wasn't a rule, it was a declaration, whether indeed you can eat food, you cannot eat food that were served. So as we learned last week, they were saying that Paul was reminding them that as to food being served to idols, you should not only rely upon your know-how. You should not only rely on what you know. You should all have this idea of love more than the knowledge that you have with you. Therefore, I have entitled this conversation today as Limited Liberties. We will continue that conversation and start on, because we ended in verse 3, today we will start with verse 4. You tell me, limited liberties. How can liberties be limited? How do we define liberty? Liberty is defined as the power or right to act, speak, or think as he wants. That's liberty. I can do whatever I want. I can say whatever I want. I have that power and right. And every known ruler in the world of any country would put freedom or liberty as their utmost concern. Everybody wants to be free. Nobody wants to be in bondage, secluded. Everybody would want to have freedom. And another definition of liberty is the state of being unrestricted. So if I have entitled our conversation today as limited liberties, it doesn't seem like it's a paradox of sorts. It does not seem to be in agreement. But liberty does not mean that we can go sinning without guilt and that we are free to do whatever we want. That is not what liberty means. Liberty, as Benjamin Franklin so beautifully described it, is liberty is the right to do what is right. And every believer of Christ should have this definition of liberty. That liberty does not mean that you can do whatever you want, right or wrong. You can say whatever you please, right or wrong. But instead, liberty is the right to do what is right. And Paul is going to tell us this morning that liberty that you have, because we have received the utmost liberty, with our faith in Jesus, there is now no more condemnation. There is nothing that can set us apart from Christ. Nothing. His letter to the Romans would be able to say that nothing can separate us from the love of Jesus. Not even death, not principalities, not sinning. But that does not mean that you can sin. And that does not mean that you can just hurt people. That doesn't mean that you can just go above everybody else just because you are now set apart for Christ. Therefore, I have entitled this conversation Limited Liberties with this principle in mind, that liberty is limited by our love for others. That is the set limitation of the liberties that we have. That our freedom is dictated by our love for others. That is the boundary that is set. You can do whatever you want for as long as that is limited and bounded by your love for God and for others. Because otherwise, all of us will just be doing what we think is good in our own eyes. The 8th chapter of the letter of Paul to the Corinthians seemed not relevant to us today, because Paul goes back to the fact that he was talking about eating meat that has been offered to idols. And as we discussed last Sunday, it was a reality to the Corinthian as with the Roman church. If you will read the book of Romans, Paul also addressed this matter, where he said that it is prevalent. But that's not a reality to us today, is it? We don't offer food to idols. So you may go back to me and tell me, Sister Barry, that's not relevant. But we know, as discussed last Sunday, that there are a lot of gray areas in our lives that is not written and stipulated clearly in the Bible. Whether tama ba yan o hindi. Are we allowed to listen to music that has words that are not very acceptable? Is it all right for women to put on makeup or any adornment? Is it okay to go shopping on Sundays? Is it okay to put tattoos or body piercing? Questions that are not very clearly stated in the Bible. It's neither wrong nor right. And we agreed last Sunday that if there are areas in our lives that are in what we call the gray areas, such as food being offered to idols during the time of Paul, what do we do? So Paul addresses that. He clarifies it once more. He goes back. After discussing about knowledge and love in the first part, he goes back and brings us back to the purpose of this part of the letter. So, about eating meat that has been offered to idols, a daily occurrence to the Corinthian church. What do we do, Paul? So Paul is saying, well, we all know that an idol is not really a god, and that there is only one God. Wonderful statement. Paul is describing again what he has taught to them. There is only one God. We know from our Greek mythology that Greece came from a polytheistic society, from a polytheistic faith. They believed that there were numerous gods. As a matter of fact, they were so numerous that they said that when one goes to Athens, you will see more gods than men. Why? Because there are sculptural representation all over the land. That when you go at every street corner, there is a god for that. There is a god for the street, for the road. There is a god for the person. There is a god for every aspect of their lives. And as shared last week, they even have gods for thieves. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, they have a god for that. So much so that when Paul visited, he saw the god, the representation for the unknown God, in case meron po silang nakalimutan. So if that aspect of their lives, hindi nila alam kung kanino sila mag-o-offer, they will go to the God, to the unknown God, so that all is covered. So Paul is addressing it here. Those idols that you see there, that they are worshiping, we all know that it's not really a God. Can you imagine the people who were knowledgeable? Kita mo na, I knew it. There's really no God in those. They are just mere representations of what? Creations of the artists of those time. Creation of mere figment of their imagination. That this God would have looked like this. And seeing the sculptures of old and seeing them now, yung sculpture po nun, di ba, they are big. Women were big. Meron po silang bilbil. Uso ang bilbil nun. Di ba? Why? Because to them, during that time, that was beautiful. So wag ikahiya ang bilbil. Beautiful yan. That was the representation of their gods during that time. And Paul is saying, they are not really gods. Those idols are not gods. Can you imagine now, imagine with me, the knowledgeables. So there are now two factions. So two teams, knowledgeables and the weak. So can you imagine the knowledgeables now? If there is a debate, point one for the knowledgeables. Why? Yay! Those idols are not really true. And since they are not really true, we can eat of the meat being offered to the idols, correct? I can imagine the knowledgeables cheering on in their mind, yay, point for us. Because those idols are not really God. That's what Paul is saying. We all know that. And Paul again declares, as he has declared in every church that he would establish, there is only one God. And that God is the God that you know now. So there's no use, no need to worship all of those idols. And Psalm 115 has this beautiful description of what an idol is. Not my words. This is the words of the psalmist. Our God is in the heavens, and He does as He wishes. Their idols, referring to those sculptures and mga rebulto, their idols are merely things of silver and gold, shaped by human hands. They have mouths, but cannot speak. They have eyes, but cannot see. They have ears, but cannot hear. They have noses, but cannot smell. They have hands, but cannot feel. They have feet, but they cannot walk. They have throats, but cannot make a sound. Can you imagine holding those hands, crying to them, worshiping them, bowing to them? What is the psalmist saying? Those are not real. They're empty. Even if you speak to them, you offer every meat that you have harvested, every cattle that you have killed, every lamb that you have slaughtered, they do not hear you. They do not see you. They cannot speak. They have mouths, but they do not open and answer your prayers and your pleas. Because those idols are not God. Yay! Sabi ng knowledgeables, point for us. Those idols are not God. So food being offered to them, the feast that is laid before us, they're okay to be eaten. Because those idols are nothing but empty shapes of silver or gold or wood or stone. They're nothing. They're empty. So can you imagine the task that we have? With all those people believing and bowing to the idols that man has created? There is such a big responsibility upon our shoulders to be able to declare to them, those idols are not gods. There is only one true God. And that God is the God that we know and we worship. And that is something that we have to declare. And Paul continues, there may be so-called gods, both in heaven and in earth. We know how numerous the gods of the Greeks were. In Greek mythology, babagsak tayo kasi hindi natin alam yung answer because there were just sheerly numerous gods. And some people actually worship many gods. They did not get satisfied with many gods. They also worshiped many lords. The lords are of lower rang than the gods. The gods can give you anything you want, but the lords are specific to what you need. And they would come and worship, and oftentimes the lords are still alive. And these lords would be worshipped. Why? Because they had so much power. They can award a land to you, and they can take your land away from you. That was how powerful they were. So even the lords were worshipped. And Paul was saying, but for us, there is only one God, the Father, by whom all things are created, and for whom we live. Paul was declaring the Shema to the Israelites. We said, the Lord our God is one. There is only one God, not many gods. And there is only one Lord. Who? Jesus Christ, through whom all things were created and through whom we live. Who is God? God is by whom all things were created. He created us. He created all things. And for whom we live. The life we live is the life that is created and called for by God Himself. And there is only one Lord, not many lords, through whom all things were created and through whom we live. The idols, those many gods and many lords that they believe in, we all know that they are not true. Because there's really only one God and one Lord. So cheers na naman yung mga cheers, the knowledgeables. Point 2. Very strong point. Since their idols are not true, then whatever you offer to them, pwede kainin, Paul, diba? That was what they were reiterating and emphasizing. The idols are not true. There is not many gods. There's only one. So we should, so those food, meats that are offered to any idol, those sold in the temple courts at a bargain, we can eat them. Right, Paul? They were drawing Paul to their attention and drawing him so that he will be able to declare to them, yes, pwedeng kainin. However, Paul said, as if so gently, however, he says, not all believers know this. What is this? That the idols are not real. Some are accustomed to thinking of idols as being real. So, when they eat food that has been offered to idols, they think it is as if that they have worshipped the real gods. And their weak conscience is violated. Wow. Violated talaga. In other translations, it will say defiled. It is a violation of what is in their mind. The weaker Corinthians, the weaker believers, knew it. But the knowledge hasn't been placed in their lives. It's not an acceptance to them. Pretty much like the only example that I can think of is like an alcoholic who comes to the saving faith of Christ. And then here you are at a party serving wine. And you would serve him and he would decline. And you would insist because you'll say, bro, okay lang. Hindi naman tayo maglalasing. May lasing bang tumanggap na lasing siya? Wala. Lahat ng lasing, sasabihin, hindi ako lasing. And what happens? You keep on insisting and insisting to the point that he fails. And his conscience is violated. What is Paul saying here? There are those who still cannot understand. Yes, they know. They've been taught. But the lifestyle isn't there yet. It hasn't sunk in. When I was a new believer, I would go to church service with my sister who brought me to the Lord in the morning. And I would go to Mass at night. O kaya Saturday night. Diba, meron yung parang Mass for the following day. Why? Because I couldn't do without communion. Diba sa Christian church, we just have our communion once a month? And I couldn't do away with that. Parang feeling ko, I didn't go to church if I did not have communion. So for a long time, I was doing that. I was going to church, I was going to service in the morning and going to Mass in the afternoon. And my sister would always tell me, ate, okay lang yan, until you're ready. And indeed, until the time that I was able to understand, until the time that the heart has followed what the mind was dictating, it was then that I completely surrendered and said, yes, I will do what is right and what is necessary as far as I understood. Paul is saying here, if we keep on insisting on our rights and on our know-hows, if we keep on insisting what is right to them, even if they do not accept it as right, then we violate their consciences. We bother them. Sabi ni Sister Barry, pwede. Pero sa tingin ko, hindi. You look at the Bible, you read back to back. Hindi ka na natulog. You read the whole book. And it's not written there. Do we insist? What is Paul saying here? They're still not used to it. All their lives, they've been accustomed to the fact that this food offered to idols were offered so that the demons will not be able to get into my body. And here you are telling me that I am going to take that and eat it? No. I do not want to do anything with my old practice. And what is Paul saying here? If we insist on our rights, then it's tantamount to violating their consequences. And then, he follows and says, it's true that we can't win God's approval by what we eat. It doesn't matter to God. Did you eat your broccoli? Are you like Popeye who eats your spinach daily? Do you eat fish, chicken, or beef? To God, you can't win His approval because the Corinthian church were attaching the eating of meat offered to idols as a level of spirituality. Paul is saying, yes, it's true that God is not looking at what you're eating. He does not scrutinize what is in your menu. He does not scrutinize what went into your mouth. As a matter of fact, Mark said that it is not what comes into your mouth that matters, but what comes out of it, right? Are they words that are so harsh that people cannot swallow it? Are you hurting people by your words? It's not what comes into your mouth. And that is what Paul is agreeing to. You can't win God's approval by what you eat. We don't lose anything if we eat it. What's it? The meat offered to idols? And we don't gain anything if we do. You do not become spiritually mature just by eating defiled meat or offered meat. So the knowledgeable, again, we're saying, yes, pwedeng kainin yung meat na inoffer. They're missing the whole point. They're missing the whole point. But what you must be careful of, so that your freedom does not cause others with a weaker conscience to stumble and fall. Paul then reminded the Corinthians that, yes, you are free. There's no more condemnation of sin. But that does not excuse you to cause someone to stumble and fall and falter from their sin. Because liberty is limited by our love for others. Paul is saying, watch out. Be watchful of the freedom that you have. Because in Christ, the limit to your liberty is set by your love for others. Are you showing love by insisting in them that yes, you can eat? Kainin mo, bro. Mature ka na, kainin mo. But if that will cause them to stumble and fall, limit your liberties by your love for others. For if others see you with your superior knowledge, it's as if, when I was reading here, wow, si Paul was as if mocking those Corinthians who were so knowledgeable, eating in the temple of an idol. Won't they be encouraged to violate their conscience by eating food that has been offered to an idol also? If they see you eating those food, what will they say? Ay, okay naman pala. But if hindi pa po kaya, if they still cannot accept, this is what Paul says. So, because of your superior knowledge, and the knowledgeable were cheering, ngiti-ngiti sila, di ba? Clap, clap, clap sila doon. Now they are being addressed by Paul and saying, because of your superior knowledge, a weak believer whom Christ died will be destroyed. Such strong words from Paul. Paul destroyed talaga? Hindi ba pwedeng nadapa lang? That we can help and stand up and ask them to stand up again? What is Paul saying here? Paul is saying that you, because of what you know, will insist on something that is still a defilement to the conscience or to the belief of the weaker believer. And Paul addresses whom Christ died for. If we stand and hurt people, we don't only hurt that person. We hurt Christ Himself. Why? Because Christ died for him. He sacrificed His life. He suffered on the cross, giving up His kingship in heaven. For what? For us. Tingnan niyo po yung katabi niyo. Christ died for that person. And if we can only look at person through the eyes of Christ, if we can only understand that that person is so loved by God, so loved by Christ, that He needed to come to die for them, to die for us, then siguro wala nang awayan. There will be no petty quarrels. If you love someone with the love of Christ, if you see that someone as someone for whom Christ died for, wala nang tampo-tampuhan. Di ka magtatampo. If you love a person as Christ loved them, and we would look at them as someone that Christ died for, what is Paul saying? Your superior knowledge, if it causes a weak believer to be destroyed, then what did he say? When you sin against the other believers by encouraging them to do something that they do not want, something that they still do not understand, something that they believe is wrong, you are sinning against who? That person? No. Paul is saying you're sinning against Christ. Why? Because Christ died for them. For us. And if you're going to hurt that person, magpapako ka muna sa krus. If you will cause the destruction of that person, then do the sacrifice that Christ did. It is only then that you can purchase that person for a price and do whatever you can. Because we have been ransomed by Christ, so that there is nothing that can separate us from Him anymore. That is why we are free. We hurt people. Ayaw nang pumunta ng church. That's on us. That is what Paul is saying. If people look at you, look at us, and instead of giving glory to God and saying, Christ died for them. Because if we look at people through that light, we're not going to lie. We're not going to hurt them. We're not going to put one over them. Because we will look at them as God looked at that person, worthy to be purchased by the blood of no one lesser than His one and only Son. But where are we? We cause people to sin. We cause people to fall. We cause people to get hurt. And who do we sin against? Strong words from Paul. We sin against Christ. We mock the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. Because our liberty is limited by what? Our love for others. We should see others through the spectrum of the lens of God. We should look at others in the love that Christ has sacrificed for. And this is Paul's position. So if what I eat cause another believer to sin, wow. Sabi ni Paul, I will be a vegan, not eating meat anymore as long as I live. For I don't want to cause another believer to stumble. He will put himself in that position. I will not eat meat if that will cause a believer to stumble. Sige na, masasaktan ka, you'll get hurt, okay na. For as long as I do not cause that person to stumble. Ang daming bashers, they're all saying bad things about you. They're not sinning against you. You are precious in God's sight. Very precious, that you were bought for a price. No less than the blood of Jesus. Liberty is limited by our love for others. Charles Spurgeon, well-known pastor, leader, author of books, had one bisyo during that time. He had a penchant for smoking the finest cigars. During that time, there was not much studies about how tobacco affects our body. So during that time, he would be smoking fine, very good cigars. And one time, a young man approached him and asked him and told him, Pastor Charles, what cigar do you smoke? If you had been given a box of cigars, he said, what would you do with them? And Charles Spurgeon said, give them to me, and I will smoke them for the glory of God. Sometime later, at the height of his fame, the cigar factory put out an ad. Claro ba? The factory of the cigar that he was smoking put out an ad. And the ad had this to say, we sell cigars that Charles Spurgeon smokes. After seeing this ad, he quit smoking. Why? It was a little sacrifice because he knew that instead of encouraging, he was becoming a stumbling block to others. And he stopped. The teaser that I posted, are we a stumbling block or a stepping stone? I hope that after this conversation, we will all desire to be stepping stones instead of stumbling blocks. What do? Look at others through the eyes of Jesus. There's this beautiful song that Joy and Chin and the music team will be rendering for us. It's a song that says, I hope I had my Father's eyes. Eyes that can see the good in people. Eyes that can see well-meaning on others. Hindi yung mali. We may not agree with how people live their lives. We may not agree in what they say or in what they do. But Jesus admonishes us, Paul admonishes us, not to be stumbling blocks, but instead set limits to the liberties that we have. And that limit will be our love for others. Help us, Lord, that we may know and see the weakness in our brethren, that instead of putting them down, we will be instruments of lifting them up until the time that they will be able to recognize fully that faith in the one true God is the one that matters. Allow us, dear Father, to live a life that is worthy of the ultimate sacrifice of Christ on the cross. Help us, Lord, to be stepping stones and not stumbling blocks. In Jesus' name we pray.
I may not be every mother's dream for her little girl, and my face may not grace the mind of everyone in the world, but that's all right as long as I can have one wish. I pray when people look inside my life, I wanna hear them say, she's got her father's eyes, her father's eyes that find the good in things when good is not around, eyes that find the source of help when help just can't be found, eyes full of compassion, seeing every pain, knowing what you're going through and feeling it the same, just like my father's eyes, my father's eyes, my father's eyes, just like my And on that day when we will pay for all the deeds we have done, good and bad, they'll all be had to see by everyone. And when you're called to stand and tell just what you saw in me, more than anything I know, I want your words to be. She had her father's eyes, her father's eyes, eyes that found the good in things when good is not around, eyes that found the source of help when help would